So the theology never changes. Broad issues of morality, murder, stealing, lying are always evil. Being good to your parents, being good to the orphans and neighbors is always good, also remains the same. What changes are the minutiae of the law, the finer details of the law. And here, for example, we find Jewish law, their requirements for kosher are stricter, for example, than the requirements for the Muslim halal equivalent. Okay? Similarly, certain things might be allowed for them and prohibited for us, and vice versa. Trivial things, but not the broad premise of morality or of anything of theology. Theology, even the minutiae, doesn't change. Nothing can change in theology because God doesn't change, the angels don't change, aspects of belief don't change, but aspects of manifestations of how we're going to worship God, they might change from prophet to prophet. Does that clarify the answer? Okay. Let's see what other more relevant questions here too. Okay, so a person is pointing out evil that exists around the earth, and so much evil is out there, wars going on, famines and plagues. How can you say that the creation is perfect? This is a very deep question, very deep question. And in reality, it brings us to an even deeper question, and that is, how do we explain the existence of evil? This is in fact the actual question. And this is a question that many people, theologians and philosophers, the ones who might look down upon so much, they've all tried to find answers to. If God is all-powerful, and He's also all-merciful, two characteristics that all religions believe in, right? No religion says, my God is weak. Every religion has to say, my God is all-powerful. And also, pretty much all religions say God is merciful. He loves mankind. If He is, then how come my neighbor's friend suffered a car accident where his son died? How come children are dying of starvation in Africa? How come the tsunami wave killed 100,000 people, as it did? How come? Very deep question. It's not trivial. It's not trivial. So deep that it's actually led to the formation of certain religions, such as Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism and whatnot. They tried to explain this question, and they basically came up with a new theology. But to summarize, Islam has an interesting response to this. Point number one, Islam says, there is no such thing as pure evil in existence. There is no such thing that is pure evil. There might be things that have some evil, but there's also some good in them. No matter what happens, there is maybe some bad in it. Sometimes things happen, there's nothing but good. So there's pure good, yes, but there's no pure evil. Most things have some good and some evil, including all of us. We have some good, we have some evil. Similarly, every incident that occurs, or every affliction that happens, every calamity that takes place, there is an element of evil, but there's also an element of good in it. If there were no poor people, we could not be generous. If there were no calamities, we would not gather together to help each other with those calamities. If we never saw a misfortune, we would never appreciate the fortunes that we have. So there is some good that comes out of every single evil that occurs. Another point that Islam mentions, and that is that you are judging good and evil based upon your limited judgments. Using our finite minds, we're projecting what is moral and immoral upon the law of God. If God does something, we think we have the arrogance to say, this is good and this is not. When our children are born, we take them to the hospital for vaccinations. You ask that little baby if it could talk, does it want to be stabbed and jabbed by a needle? He's going to say, no, I don't. But we know what's better. And sometimes you have to stab and jab and inoculate and vaccinate in order to protect for a greater good. So for us to presume of God that we know what is evil, when a tsunami wave hits, this is all nothing but evil. How do you know? How do you know? Are you becoming all knowledgeable? You're using your limited mind to pronounce a judgment on the acts of God. A third point, you are forgetting that there is something called the hereafter, where every single person who has suffered will be rewarded for that suffering. So much so, the Muslim believes that those who have suffered extensively, when they come on the Day of Judgment and they see the reward that God has in store for them, they would wish that they suffered even more. God will make it up for them. That's the point. They will make it up for them in the hereafter. Okay? Of course, when the suffering is going on, nobody wants to suffer more. But there's a time and a place that will come, the kingdom of heaven, the God that will give you the blessings and belief in Him. There is something called the hereafter. The Prophet said, no child dies and his parents remain patient at that, except that because of that tragedy, God will give them paradise. Just because they were patient at the most difficult thing that any parent can face, and that is the death of a child. This is the most difficult tragedy. Your own life is nothing compared to the life of your child. The way you love your own son and daughter, there is no comparison. For your son and daughter to be extinguished in front of your eyes, there is no tragedy greater than that. God, we know it, we believe that any parent who undergoes that child will be a means of intercession. They will enter God's kingdom because they were patient at that tragedy. So we're judging and we say, how could God have taken that child? But that child will enter the kingdom of heaven, and so will the parents. The parents will also enter paradise. You're forgetting there is something eternal, not 20, 30, 40 years of this life, eternal. That is the rewards of God. So all of these factors into account, we basically state, indeed, sometimes things occur that have some evil in them. But the good that exists is always worth the suffering that occurs, and there's something called a hereafter, where every person who suffers, every person who undergoes a trial will be given the reward that is due to him. A question from the floor before, yes?
Can you just clear that out? Is for Muslims or non-Muslims or for everybody, the parents?
For the people who believe in God. I mean, if a person rejects God, a person doesn't have faith, I mean, they're not going to be rewarded if they don't expect the reward from God. There has to be a faith before any rewards are given. Okay, the Quran, this is imperfection, same thing.
Given the imperfections in humans and their institutions, government, how can we allow a Muslim state?
Oh, it's a question of separation of church and state. I have a very different view than many Muslims. Sometimes Muslims kind of get irritated at me for saying this, but I say, we have to be pragmatic here. We're living as a religious minority. And I am not calling for a theocratic state. I'm very blunt about this. I am not. We're not calling for, I personally am not of those people who are calling to establish Islamic caliphate in North America. I fully understand that we are a religious minority, that the same constitution that allows many of the things I don't like, it also allows me to be who I am. And if we were living in a purely religious country, where some of the more right-wingers were in charge, I wouldn't be allowed to live here. I fully understand that, and I appreciate it, and I'm thankful to God for it. Therefore, I am not of those people who is calling for a theocratic state. However, I am calling for the right to live my life the way that I see fit. And that's something that I believe the Constitution clearly does give. That if you believe that you want to worship X, Y, Z, that you want to do whatever you want to do in your personal life, the Constitution clearly allows me the right to worship the way that I see fit. As long as it's not infringing on anybody else's right, you don't have the right to come and say you're not allowed to worship Allah, or you can't pray 5 times a day, or you can't wear the scarf, or you can't grow a beard. No, that's not your right, because the whole point of the Constitution is separation of church and state, and I appreciate that. I do. And I fully agree with certain people who say, to those who are calling for an Islamic state, the state you're calling for, it will strip away the rights of many of the people here to do as they please. I understand that. So I'm being very pragmatic. I'm an American Muslim here, and I understand that if I want to be an American Muslim, I have to acknowledge the laws of America and the laws of God. And so in this sense, I do agree with Jesus Christ when he said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. You have to do that as an American Muslim. So if I did give that impression, I do clarify that no, I am not calling. I mean, I don't believe that there's any country that is applying the laws of God the way that they're expected to be applied. I believe that there is no country that is purely applying the laws of God. And I also believe that, yes, indeed, there's a lot of mistreatment of minorities and of women. I believe this very clearly. Much of what happens in Muslim countries, including my grandparents are from India and Pakistan, that area, a lot of cultural habits and practices that are not Islamic take place there. I'll be the first to admit that, yes, definitely. But at the same time, I will also say there are different levels of morality that we have than other people. And I do believe men and women should strive to have those levels of morality in public. It's just a matter of levels. For example, many women get angry that how come you want your wives and your daughters to wear the scarf. Well, all I say is it's relative. In this society, in most states, if a woman were to go around topless, she'd go into jail. You're not allowed to do that. Okay? How come nobody is well, there are people campaigning to go around naked in the streets, but you don't find that, nobody's saying your rights are being stripped away. It's just relative. Just like you don't want your daughter to go around wearing nothing but underpants. Similarly, we have a higher level of morality, and we believe morality doesn't change from culture and time and place. What is good for our great-great-great-grandfathers, morality-wise, ethics-wise, hygiene-wise, we're the same people. Nothing changes. We still breathe the same air. We need the same food to eat. We're the same size, the same stature. Nothing changes. So morality-wise, yes, we are going to be more conservative, but I fully realize we're in America and we have to respect the laws of the land. Hence, any person who doesn't want to follow those laws, I can't force them to. That's their right. But I do have the right to advise them morally, and I say if you want God to reward you, you should be more conservative, yes. So I take a very pragmatic approach. I'm an American Muslim, and that means I disagree with many of the Islamist movements out there who don't seem to understand that the very freedoms that they're enjoying in this country, if they were to become empowered, those freedoms wouldn't exist anymore. So as I said, many Muslims disagree with what I'm saying, but this is my opinion about the issue. Okay. Okay, a person says, Oh, go ahead. So that I follow your definition of worship. I do not worship Christ, but I view Him as a model for living. How do you respond? Okay, and he says here, and I'll say, your passion about God and Islam comes across as intolerant and demeaning of people of other faiths. Okay, I appreciate your honesty. If I do sound intolerant and demeaning, I really do apologize. However, I am basically unabashedly stating I believe that Islam is the religion from God. That's something that I can't quite, mix my words or mince my words about. I believe Islam is the religion of God. I believe Judaism and Christianity are also religions of God, but they have been supplanted by later religions. Judaism has been supplanted by both Christianity and Islam has supplanted the other two traditions. I did not mean to sound intolerant or demeaning, and I do apologize if you felt that way. But with regards to your first point, and that is, I do not worship Christ, but I view Him as my model for living. How do you respond? I respond, that's exactly what needs to be done. But if you really and truly want to worship God, you need to follow the example of the final prophet as well. There is no contradiction in this, and in order to be a full Muslim, you follow the examples of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, all of them. Okay, it's not, you don't restrict yourself, and that goes back to the question, my Jewish brother asked, and that is, I believe in God and the laws of God, but the response was, for a Muslim to be a Muslim, you also have to believe in all the prophets. But this is a positive step, and I would like to point one thing, perhaps, obviously the topic is very limited, I can go into a lot of tangents. One point that I would like to mention, it is not the right of any Muslim to assign heaven and hell to another human being. It is not our right. I cannot judge any of you sitting here. Even if I disagree with your theology, even if I say I don't agree Jesus Christ is the Son of God, I disagree with this. Even if I say you must believe in the Prophet Muhammad, yes, that is what we believe. But we also believe our job is to proclaim the message, and judgment is for God alone. This is a fundamental point of Islam. It is not my right to assign heaven and hell to anybody. I never said, and no Muslim can ever say, by the way, if anybody says this, I'm a theologian, my expertise is theology. Any Muslim says that you are going to hell, that Muslim doesn't know what he's talking about. He has no clue. In Islam, we are not allowed to specify even heaven and hell. Muslims don't even know if they're going to heaven. We don't know. Maybe God will punish one of us because of our arrogance, because of a sin that we've done. We don't know. Don't be self-righteous. We're told in the Quran, there's a verse in the Quran, don't make yourselves self-righteous. God tells us, don't purify yourselves, only God knows who is pious. So I really do apologize if I've come across as intolerant, but perhaps it is my zeal for believing in Islam that has come across this way. As for judgment, I unequivocally believe only God judges. Only God knows who you are, what your intentions are. And those who really and truly are sincere, God knows who they are. And God will look at that and judge you based upon that. But I do say as a Muslim that we have been told in our text, and it's quite clear, just like Christians believe the only path to God is through Jesus Christ. Similarly, we believe the only path to God is through submission to Him alone, not to any other being, and by worshipping Him through the laws that He has revealed. We believe this as a generic reality. As for specifying upon individuals, we leave the judgment to God alone. And it is possible that certain people might not necessarily agree with us But God knows what's in their heart, and He knows they were sincere, and He might forgive them on the Day of Judgment. We believe this as well. So it's not my job to pronounce verdicts on anybody, but it is my job to proclaim the message of Islam. And that is what hopefully